some of the key areas that I think are important to focus on are one, for sure, transportation biosecurity. There's been some progress made there over the last few years with improved washes, some of the drying assistance, and things of that nature. But certainly, where it starts for me is getting the employees or the caretakers into the barn in a biosecure manner. And ultimately, we're relying on these people to perform the process day in and day out, whether somebody's watching or not. And ultimately, that's where a lot of the risk lies, I believe.
Hello, everyone. I'm Laura Greiner, your host for today's Swine podcast. And with me today, I have Dr. Daniel Boykin, who's the veterinarian at Cactus Feeders. How are you today, Daniel?
I'm doing good. Thanks, Laura.
We're glad to have you on today. Some of our audience may not be very familiar with you. And so before we really jump into the topic at hand, maybe give a little bit of a background about yourself.
Sure. So I am originally from North Carolina. I went to NC State for undergraduate animal science degree and continued to earn my doctor of veterinary medicine there in 2016. From there, I was hired at Christensen Farms. I moved across country to live in Minnesota for a couple of years before having the opportunity to join the team here at Cactus in 2018, where I've been ever since then.
Well, perfect. Well, I'm really excited to visit with you today. I know, we're looking at this time of year, at least in the United States, it's winter. We're sitting right on the edge of a snowstorm coming in. We're all talking about it. And every time when we think about winter, I think one of the first words that comes into mind is biosecurity. And you've had some commercial experience working in various production systems. And so I really want to pick your brain today a little bit on maybe where some of the holes in biosecurity are that we need to really focus on these days.
Yeah, that definitely is a hot topic, really any time during the year, but certainly this time of year, we see increase in disease pressure across the board. It's been a strong focus for us here at Cactus, and certainly, going to some of these different conferences where it's obviously a point of conversation, a point of interest and focus for biosecurity across the industry. So, some of the key areas that I think are important to focus on are one, for sure, transportation biosecurity. There's been some progress made there over the last few years with improved washes, some of the drying assistance and things of that nature. But certainly, where it starts for me is getting the employees or the caretakers into the barn in a biosecure manner. And ultimately, we're relying on these people to perform the process day in and day out, whether somebody's watching or not. And ultimately, that's where a lot of the risk lies, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So let's maybe walk through that a little bit when you're thinking about enforcing biosecurity on a farm, because I think you hit the nail on the head. It's when nobody's looking. And we certainly want to create biosecurity processes that are easy to employ and easy to follow. But I know when you first introduce people to a farm, they kind of panic a little bit. It's a lot of information. So what are some thought processes around how we get caretakers into the farm in a way that is repeatable?
Right. No, that's a good point. And, the nature of our business is that there is a certain amount of turnover, and we do have new people going in all the time. So a big point of focus for us has been training, and ultimately, we want to make sure that the people that are having to do these processes all the time are aware of what is right. within themselves, they have to hold themselves accountable to doing what they know is right, but they have to first know what those processes are. And so, there's been a couple of things that we've done. One is to revamp our onboarding process to include a more inclusive biosecurity training for new employees. And then beyond that, over the last couple of years, we really have vamped up a biosecurity auditing process, site biosecurity auditing process, which, it is a snapshot in time to say, how did the farm look today in terms of biosecurity? How are the employees, caretakers doing today with all of our processes? But above all, it keeps clear focus to the farm that we are interested in improving biosecurity, and it also allows us to identify other opportunities that maybe we didn't think about in the onset. And so it certainly is a fluid and evolving process that we reserve the right to update and include new things all the time.
Hmm. Absolutely. What about visitors? So visitors on sow farms or even wean-to-finish barns are certainly one of those that we probably are even more conscious about, because either one, they may not understand the biosecurity rules that your system has in place, or equipment or even vehicle cleanliness can be a challenge. So how do you handle visitor biosecurity?
Yeah, so I guess for our sow farms, we have a much better control over that at this time. And, that by design, you look back over the years where biosecurity has really made progress in the industry. The first focus was sow farm biosecurity. We have to keep the sow farms healthy. And so we have a pretty good control over who and what goes into our sow farms on a day-to-day basis. And that way we are able to monitor what their appropriate downtime was. Why are they going in there? What do they have business with? And we have the ability to even prepare in advance if they have, certain clothing needs, certain tools and equipment that they need to, let's say, do maintenance or service something on the farm. We can prepare for their visit and have that equipment and supplies in the farm for them upon their visit. On wean to finish, it's a little bit more challenging for sure. And certainly we would ask that any visitors would sign a log, and we would like to know who's going into the farms. But the geography is so much more vast on wean-to-market. We have sites all over the state. And with us having a big majority of our business being in contract growers, a lot of times if they choose to hire someone to do maintenance, or they choose to hire someone to do a vaccination event or a loadout, then that is their responsibility. And so we also would hope and encourage them to uphold the standards that we're asking them to do day in and day out with their visitors. But that definitely is an area that we need to continue to understand and improve upon. And, I just can recall in some recent conferences, and I can't say which one, I think maybe a Lehman conference this fall, that there was quite a bit of discussion on wean to market biosecurity in general. And it was interesting to me that certainly we feel like that we have known that rendering would be a risk. And so there's been a clear direction and movement, I think, to alternative on-site dead disposal methods and everything that way. But the one area that really stood out to me was the correlation with maintenance on the farm with the timing of an outbreak. And so, that just identifies that these events really can lead to disease outbreaks. And, when you get to thinking about it, it makes sense. A lot of times they're bringing in specialized equipment to perform some of the maintenance. A lot of times these contract maintenance crews or businesses probably are not devoted to an individual production systems. So there's probably crossover between systems. And so even if we were to uphold some requirement or standard, then without having a clear understanding of where they had been before, or if another production system maybe didn't have the same understanding of disease status of a site, and well, they may have been to a farm and they say, well, yeah, they didn't say they had any disease problems, but in all reality, maybe they did, and we just don't know. So those are definitely areas that we have opportunity to improve upon.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. One of the other things I think that kind of came into my head, I'm going to go back to sows and then we'll go back to wean to finish. I'm going to bounce a bit. But when you were talking about entry into the farm, we've had these discussions before. We've actually seen it during PED breaks where we have, instead of just the standard Danish entry and then walking into the shower, it's almost like a double Danish entry. So you change shoes once and put on different, Tyvek or something, and then you go actually walk into the farm and do another Danish and then a shower. Do you see that coming down the pipeline, some more what we call secondary barriers before entering a farm?
I think that is a great idea. We have to be very conscious when we're thinking about biosecurity that we need to be people that think outside the box a bit and consider new ideas and new methodologies, because just because we've done it the same way for so many years doesn't mean that we can't be better. And so you make a valid point, and I can see some progress that has been made. There's been a lot of project work and everything on adding the one bench before going into the shower room. And so certainly, having the shower was a big step, and then making it another step before getting in there. And you're alluding to even more multiple steps. Anytime that you're thinking about biosecurity, I think it's not just one process that makes it successful. It is the layers. And so layers can be completely non-related biosecurity processes, such as supply entry versus employee entry, which we're talking about right now. But certainly adding layers within a process is also of benefit. The trouble is that all these things take investment, and with the way that the economy and the markets are, and grain prices, we're constantly looking at what can we do to minimize input costs to maintain profitable. And it can be difficult to generate a return on investment on some of these biosecurity processes, because there's no clear benefit other than, well, we're looking to reduce disease outbreak. And so some of the work that's been done in some of these biosecurity processes to say, how does it impact break rate incidents, that we can hinge on and try to show. But a lot of this ends up being conceptual, and that can be a difficult sell, but certainly I think that there's value.
Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of times too, it's just going back to basics and making sure, as you mentioned, we get those right. And then we can start thinking about the layers, and certainly making it employee friendly is always going to be key, because again, if we don't make it employee friendly, they're not going to do it, right? They're going to skip a step here and there. So I do think you're talking, exactly what I would expect in terms of biosecurity. But let's kind of go back over now to wean to finish. And one of the things that comes into my head, and we just talk about simplifying and keeping things easy. I can't tell you how many pictures I still see today of farms, whether it's wean to finish or even sow barns, where the cars are parked right up against the building. And to me, there is a step, and wean to finish tends to kind of be the piece where it was like, well, they're going to market, so maybe we don't have to worry as much. What are your thoughts in terms of biosecurity? Showers and wean to finish barns? Is it Danish entry? what types of procedures should we be thinking about?
Yeah, this is where it starts getting a lot more complicated for sure. And the mentality, I guess, that I'm trying to portray and that we're trying to work towards is, why is there a different mindset to say, well, that's what we do on the sow farms and this is what we do on wean-to-finish? Biosecurity is biosecurity. And so if we feel like that we have developed a good process, or a process that we believe mitigates disease introduction into the farms at the sow farms, why can't we take those concepts and directly apply them to wean-to-market? And, I think that one big area that is probably not as nearly as good on the wean-to-market as it is on sow farm is knowledge of health status. And so we're trying to stay as alert as possible of a new outbreak of PRRS or PD. And you like to say that you're not going to change your behavior if you know that. You still should perform the processes the exact same way. But the problem is, if you don't know that a farm was PRRS or PED positive, and we expect our field staff to make it to multiple sites in a day to fill their schedule, that they could easily move it from farm to farm. And you mentioned the risk of vehicle. Well, certainly, you like to think if they do a complete change of clothing, shower into the farm, and in the reverse order, that you're going to keep the sanitation of your truck cab clean. But certainly there would be a clear risk of bringing that back to your vehicle. And then when you go to your next site, that it would be much easier to bring it into the door if you were parked closer. And so there's all these things to take into consideration. But I think that defining the health status of the sites is probably a point to consider. And certainly there seems, unfortunately, to be a different mindset on wean-to-market of, well, maybe I can just pass my phone through in case I get a call while I'm there, or maybe this grower doesn't have the clothing that I prefer to wear, so I'm just going to bring my clothes in. And things that you would absolutely never do at a sow farm that are considered okay on wean-to-market. We just have to change that script, and that's going to take time. That'll take time.
Absolutely. And I think you bring up a good point on transportation, and not so much on the cars, but I'm thinking about the actual transport vehicles for the pigs. Because we see the similar thing, right? Should we wash our trucks in between each load to market? Should we not? And you had mentioned there's been some newer data coming out on transportation, but what's your take on how we manage the movement of pigs? Sows, we know that those trailers are always clean, but when we think about wean-to-finish, what are your thoughts?
Right. Yeah. So we at Cactus have taken the stance of washing every trailer after every load. And it really is more so, certainly we don't want there to be a disease introduction in late finishing, because it can be very costly and add to your late mortalities after all the input costs are there. But beyond that is, even on dump loads where it would be the last load going out, we're more concerned about the risk of contaminating the site prior to new pigs coming in. And so even down to that very last load, we see value in bringing a clean trailer to that site. And, I think that transport biosecurity took a big leap in terms of progress around the time of PD a few years ago. And certainly, as we look to the future of the risk of a foreign animal disease or African swine fever, that we're going to need to continue to make progress, as that's going to be a critical piece in the event of a foreign animal disease.
Absolutely. I can think about some of our listeners are probably sitting here and thinking, well, they don't have access necessarily to a dryer this time of year, and we all know we're stepping into negative-degree weather and snow on the ground. And so we've got feed trucks and transport vehicles and employee cars that are coming in with snow packs. And we've all seen Scott D's snowball project from years and years ago. So what are your thoughts on how we approach winter weather when maybe we can't use what we consider more of the conventional disinfecting processes that we can use 9 months out of the year?
Yeah, that's a good point. And this time of year, it's easy to make those comments because, like you said, here in the Midwest, we're facing blizzard conditions over the next few days, and so it's certainly something that needs to take into consideration. Generally, when we're having these conversations during the summer and somebody wants to say, well, what about during the winter? I'm like, well, guess what? It's not winter. So let's focus on getting the things right and not falling back on that. But you're spot on that it is our reality, and we do deal with those colder times. And so one thing that we have taken into consideration or that we are utilizing are some different powder disinfectants. Certainly to wash open chutes are risky for the pigs. You know, if you wash the chutes and they freeze over, then you've got a skating rink, and the next load out, it's a safety issue for the pigs. For anybody pushing the pigs up the chute, they could slip and fall, and so we have to maintain the welfare of the pigs and the people for sure. And so that takes some of our tools out of play. And so certainly we use some of the powdered disinfectants that are available in those scenarios. And then also we've taken a pretty strong stance to having enclosed dock height chutes. And so then you still have the heat, and it doesn't limit your ability to do a complete wash and disinfect on that. But even outside in some of the scenarios when we're at high risk times of year, we know that there maybe is a disease risk in the area, or even some managers will take the extra precaution to utilize these powdered disinfectants and just spread them around the entryways, spread them around the ends of chutes, and maybe even the driveways in some instances when we think that there's an extreme high risk. And so those are some of the tools that we have available. But again, it's not just one thing that makes it successful, but that's one possible outcome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion with the powder, because I know, again, we always have those conversations, especially around the feed trucks and some of those that we know are going between sites on any given day. And I think you mentioned the discussion around the biosecurity and the pyramid. And so how or what would you recommend to the people that are contract growers and as you mentioned, have people coming into their sites, right? If I'm a production company, I own the feed mills, I have a little bit more control over, right, that movement. So how do you, or what recommendations do you have for those contract growers that are trying to balance biosecurity?
Well, a lot of times the contract growers are, if a site breaks with disease, they may not be financially responsible. They don't, in these cases, own the pigs. They don't own the feed, many of the inputs. They own the facility and the labor. And so certainly what we like to say is that they are our partners. And so despite that not directly impacting their pocketbook, that they have interest in us doing well, because ultimately that in the long run means that they have a longevity to their contract and the ongoing relationship, and it'll be a lot better of a working relationship. But beyond that is with the disease introduction into the farm, it means more work. There's going to be more treatments, there's going to be more mortality and more work associated. And so what we would ask is, and it goes back to some of the training, that hopefully they understand the process and that they're executing it day in and day out. But not only that, but they are the ones that are there most frequently. And we would ask that they uphold the same standards that we're holding them to, that they hold those same standards to any visitors or contract labor that may be coming into their facility.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Great suggestions there, Daniel. Well, I kind of see that our time of conversation is wrapping up. So maybe I'd like for you to hit a few key points that you'd like for our listeners to take away today around biosecurity and managing it on their farms.
So I guess to sum it up, I would say a key area would be consistency. You would want to have a consistent approach to biosecurity, one that can be replicated time in, time out. We've gone back and forth talking a lot about training and making sure that the process is well enough understood and that there's a process to bring maybe new people, whether it be new contract growers, new employees, up to speed. And then also monitoring how well is the process being executed. And that comes back to the auditing piece. And so I think those would be three big key takeaways to focus on for biosecurity.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
It is time to our famous three.
Well, as you know, or maybe you don't know, but we typically ask our guest speakers a couple of common questions at the end. And so I'm going to start with a question around a swine resource. And for our listeners today, would you have a swine resource that you would recommend to them?
I would say a big resource that I rely on is a network of people. And my network will be different than your network, but the industry is relatively small in the grand scheme of things. And so there's going to be a lot of overlay, and somebody that I know, I might talk with you and you know them, or you know someone else and you give me a recommendation. And so, I would say above all and at large, it would be just the complete network of people and interactions that I may have at conferences, people that I've crossed paths with over the years.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's actually a very good recommendation. And it is interesting. The industry, while we're competitive, we are a small industry, and we really do like to help each other out. At least my experience, when I go to those meetings and we have a problem, it's more likely somebody else also has that problem, and they're very willing to share and discuss, and maybe not in a big public area, but off in a corner. And I think that's a great reference point for sure. Well, the last question we'd like to ask you really focuses around if you can think of someone in your life that you define as successful, and you can define success however you'd like to define it. What's a trait that they have possessed or that they do possess that has allowed them to be successful?
I would say there's a lot of different ways to define success. One key trait that I think helps to drive success is maintaining a positive outlook and being an eternal optimist. And, it's easy sometimes when times are tough and to get into a slump and, focus on where things are wrong and what's wrong. But I think finding the good in things is always a way to continue to make progress and move in the direction that you want to go.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great trait for sure. Well, Daniel, I do want to thank you again for your time today. And it's been a pleasure visiting with you and talking to you more about biosecurity and some of the things that we should be considering on the farm. Again, for our listeners, this is, again, conversations that we hear all of the time, but it's really going back to the basics and creating a process that's user-friendly, that provides some layers and is repeatable on whatever farms that you're running into. So, Daniel, with that, again, we want to thank you. For our listeners, this is Dr. Daniel Boykin with Cactus Feeders. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. I enjoyed the conversation.
Imagine if, with a few key concepts, you could have the potential to create a massive positive impact by bringing from hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars for swine producers. Join us on this small group and go to the next level of swine nutrition on this 7-week-long elite online training in applied swine nutrition and feeding by myself and my world-class invited speakers. Additionally, you enjoy an exclusive community to exchange ideas. Go now to www.eliteswinenutritionist.com.